Hello, everybody, and this is Narendra Kumar, and we are from NRK Academy. And today we in the series of Master Classic Stories with Vocabulary Study. So, in this video, we'll be reading out this wonderful story called Two Friends by Guy de Maupassant. And in the next video, the new words which have come in this story would be given a vocabulary study. So, let's start. Guy de Maupassant, Two Friends. Besieged Paris was in the middle of. Besieged means it was sieged, it was taken over. Besieged Paris was in the throes of famine, starvation. Famine means starvation. Even the sparrows on the roofs and the rats in the sewers in the side canals were growing scarce. Were becoming less. Scarce means becoming less. People were eating anything they could get. As Monsieur Morissot, watchmaker by profession and idler for the nonce, was walking along the boulevard one bright January morning, his hands in his trousers pockets and stomach empty, he suddenly came face to face with an acquaintance, Monsieur Sauvage, a fishing chum. Chum means friend. Fishing chum. They go fishing together. Before the war broke out, Morissot had been in the habit every Sunday morning of starting out with a bamboo rod in his hand and a tin box on his back. He took the Argenteuil train, got out at Columbus, and walked thence means from there, to the Ile Marente. The moment he arrived at this place of his dreams, he began fishing and fished till nightfall. Every Sunday he met in this very spot Monsieur Sauvage, a stout, fat, jolly little man, a draper in the Rue Notre Dame de Lorette, and also an ardent fisherman. Ardent means passionate. They often spent half the day side by side, rod in hand and feet hanging over the water, dangling. And a warm friendship came up between the two. Some days they did not speak, at other times they chatted, but they understood each other perfectly without the aid of words, having similar tastes and feelings. In the spring, about 10 o'clock in the morning, when the early sun caused a light mist to float on the water and gently warmed the backs of the two enthusiastic anglers, Morissot would occasionally remark to his neighbor, "My, but it's pleasant here. My, but it's pleasant here." So he would express that feeling. To which the other would reply, "I can't imagine anything better." And these few words were enough to make them understand and appreciate each other. In the autumn, towards the close of day, when the setting sun gave a blood red glow over the western sky, and the reflection of the crimson clouds tinged the whole river with red. Tinged means touched with the color, brought a glow to the faces of the two friends and gilded the trees whose leaves were already turning at the first chill touch of winter. Monsieur Sauvage would sometimes smile at Morissot and say, "What a glorious spectacle!" And Morissot would answer, without taking his eyes from his float, "This is much better than the boulevard, isn't it?" As soon as they recognized each other, they shook hands cordially. Affected, affected means touched in terms of feeling, at the thought of meeting under such changed circumstances. Now they're not near the fishing, they're in the besieged Paris. Monsieur Sauvage, with a sigh, murmured, "These are sad times." Morissot shook his head sadly, mournfully. "And such weather! This is the first fine day of the year." The sky was, in fact, of a bright, cloudless blue. They walked along side by side, reflective, thinking deeply, and sad. "And to think of the fishing," said Morissot. "What good times we used to have." "When shall we be able to fish again?" asked Monsieur Sauvage. They entered a small cafe and took an absinthe drink. Then continued, which had stopped, again it continued, their walk along the pavement. Morissot stopped suddenly. "Shall we have another absinthe?" he said. "If you like," agreed Monsieur Sauvage, and they entered another wine shop. They were quite unsteady. not steady, not stable when they came out. Owing to means because of the the result of the alcohol on their empty stomachs. It was a fine, mild day, and a gentle breeze fanned their faces like a fan, fanned their faces. The fresh air completed the effect of the alcohol on Monsieur Sauvage. He stopped suddenly, saying, "Suppose we go there." "Where?" "Fishing." "But where?" "Why, to the old place. The French outposts are close to Colombes. I know Colonel Dumoulin, and we shall easily get leave to pass." Morisot trembled with desire. Trembled with desire. "Very well, I agree." And they separated to fetch their rods and lines. An hour later, they were walking side by side on the high road. Presently means soon, they reached the villa occupied by the colonel. He smiled at the request and granted it. They continued their walk, furnished with a password. Soon they left the outpost behind them, made their way through deserted Columbus, and found themselves on the outskirts of the small vineyards which border the river. It was about 11 o'clock. Before them lay the village of Argenteuil, apparently lifeless. The heights of Augment and Senois dominated the landscape. The great plain, extending as far as Lanterre, was empty. Quite empty, a waste of dun-colored soil and bare cherry trees. Monsieur Sauvage, pointing to the heights, murmured, "The Prussians are up yonder." And the sight of the deserted country filled the two friends with vague misgivings, very negative feelings. The Prussians, they had never seen them as yet, but they had felt their presence in the neighborhood of Paris for months past, ruining France, pillaging, killing, massacring, starving them. Pillaging, killing, massacring, starving them, and a kind of superstitious terror, can't explain, superstitious can't explain terror, combined with the hatred they already felt towards this unknown, victorious nation. "Suppose we were to meet any of them," said Morisot. "We'd offer them some fish," replied Monsieur Sauvage with that Parisian lightheartedness which nothing can wholly quench. Still they hesitated to show themselves in the open country, overawed. He's very trembling, looking up at with awe. Awe means you can't understand something so big. Overawed by the utter silence which reigned around them. Utter silence which reigned. Reign means ruling. The silence was ruling around them. This whole city was silent. At last, Monsieur Sauvage said boldly, "Come, we'll make a start. Only let us be careful." And they made their way through one of the vineyards, bent double, creeping along beneath the cover afforded by the vines with eye and ear alert. A strip of bare ground remained to be crossed before they could gain the river bank. They ran across this, and as soon as they were at the water's edge, hid themselves among the dry reeds. Morisot placed his ear to the ground to ascertain, if possible, whether footsteps were coming their way. He heard nothing. They seemed to be utterly alone. Their confidence was restored, and they began to fish. Before them, the deserted Le Marente hid them from the farther shore. The little restaurant was closed and looked as if it had been deserted for years. Monsieur Sauvage caught the first gudgeon, Monsieur Morisot the second, and almost every moment one or other raised his line with a little glittering, silvery fish struggling at the end. They were having excellent sport. They slipped their catch gently into a close meshed bag lying at their feet. They were filled with joy. The joy of once more indulging, finding pleasure in a pastime of which they had long been deprived. Deprived means starved. They couldn't do it. The sun poured its rays on their backs. They no longer heard anything or thought of anything. They ignored the rest of the world. They were fishing. But suddenly, a rumbling sound. The kind of sound which comes from a drum, like the rumbling sound which seemed to come from the bowels of the earth. Bowels means inside stomach of the earth, shook the ground beneath them. The cannon were resuming their thunder. The guns, resuming their thunder, continuing, coming back their thunder. Morisot turned his head and could see towards the left, beyond the banks of the river, the formidable outline of Mont Valérien, from whose summit arose a white puff of smoke. Smoke started coming there. The next instant, a second puff followed the first. And in a few moments, a fresh detonation. Detonation means one more shot from the cannon made the earth tremble. The earth was again trembling. Others followed. And minute by minute, the mountain gave forth its deadly breath, and a white puff of smoke which rose slowly into the peaceful heaven and floated above the summit of the cliff. Monsieur Sauvage shrugged his shoulders. They are at it again, he said. Marisot, who was anxiously watching his float, bobbing up and down, was suddenly seized with the angry impatience of a peaceful man toward the mad men who were firing thus. He lost his patience and remarked indignantly, angrily. Indignantly means angrily. What fools they are to kill one another like that. They are worse than animals, replied Monsieur Sauvage. And Marisot, who had just caught a bleak, declared, and to think that it will be just the same. So long as there are governments, the Republic would not have declared war. Interposed Monsieur Sauvage. Interposed means he replied in the middle. Marisot interrupted him. Under a king, we have foreign wars. Under a republic, we have civil war. And the two began placidly, passively discussing political problems with the sound common sense of peaceful, matter-of-fact citizens, agreeing on one point, that they would never be free. And Mont Valérien thundered ceaselessly, without stopping, breaking down the houses of the French with its cannonballs, grinding lives of men to powder, destroying many a dream, many a cherished hope, many a prospective happiness, ruthlessly causing endless woe, pain and suffering in the hearts of wives, of daughters, of mothers in other lands. Such is life, declared Monsieur Sauvage. Say, rather, such is death, replied Marisot, laughing. But they suddenly trembled with the alarm at the sound of footsteps behind them, and turning around, they perceived close at hand 4 tall, bearded men. Dressed after the manner of livery servants and wearing flat caps on their heads, they were covering the 2 anglers with their rifles. The rod slipped from their owner's grasp and floated away down the river. In the space of a few seconds, they were seized, caught, bound. They were tied, their hands were tied, thrown into a boat and taken across to the Les Marentes. And behind the house they had thought deserted were about a score of German soldiers. A shaggy-looking giant who was bestriding a chair, was sitting in a chair and smoking a long clay pipe, addressed them in excellent French with the words, "Well, gentlemen, have you had good luck with your fishing?" Then a soldier deposited at the officer's feet the bag full of fish which he had taken care to bring away. The Prussian smiled. "Not bad, I see, but we have something else to talk about. Listen to me and don't be alarmed. Don't be frightened. Alarmed means frightened. You must know that in my eyes you are 2 spies. You are 2 spies. Sent to reconnoiter me and my movements. To catch me. Naturally, I capture you and I shoot you. You pretended to be fishing, the better to disguise your real errand, the real job. You have fallen into my hands and must take the consequences. Such is war. But as you came here through the outpost, you must have a password for your return. Tell me that password and I will let you go. Tell me the password and I will let you go." The 2 friends, pale as death, all color gone from their face, stood silently, side by side, a slight fluttering of the hands alone betraying their emotion. Flutterings, moving. "No one will ever know," continued the officer. "You will return peacefully to your homes, and the secret will disappear with you. If you refuse, that is not give the password, it means death, instant death. Choose." They stood motionless and did not open their lips. The Prussian, perfectly calm, went on with a hand outstretched toward the river. "Just think that in 5 minutes you will be at the bottom of that water. In 5 minutes you have relations. I presume Mont Valérien still thundered. The 2 fishermen remained silent. The German turned and gave an order in his own language. Then he moved his chair a little way off that he might not be so near the prisoners, and a dozen men stepped forward, rifle in hand, and took up a position 20 paces off. "I give you 1 minute," said the officer, "not a second longer." Then he rose quickly, went over to the two Frenchmen, took Morisot by the arm, led him a short distance off, and said in a low voice, "Quick, the password. Your friend will know nothing. I will pretend to relent. I will pretend to relent." Which means accept. Morisot answered not a word. Then the Prussian took Monsieur Sauvage aside in like manner and made him the same proposal. Monsieur Sauvage made no reply. Again they stood side by side. The officer issued his orders. The soldiers raised their rifles. Then by chance, Morisot's eyes fell on the bag full of gudgeon lying on the grass a few feet from him. A ray of sunlight made the still quivering fish glisten like silver, and Morisot's heart sank. Despite his efforts at self-control, his eyes filled with tears. "Goodbye, Monsieur Sauvage," he faltered. "Goodbye, Monsieur Morisot," replied Sauvage. They shook hands, trembling from head to foot with a dread fear beyond their mastery. The officer cried, "Fire!" The 12 shots were as one. 12 shots were as one. Which was very one out there. Tuck, tuck, tuck. Monsieur Sauvage fell forward instantaneously. Morisot, being the taller, swayed slightly. He swayed slightly and fell across his friend with face turned skyward and blood oozing from a rent hole in the breast of his coat. The German issued fresh orders. His men dispersed and presently returned with ropes and large stones which they attached to the feet of the two friends. Then they carried them to the river bank. Mount Valérien, its summit now enshrouded in smoke, still continued to thunder. The cannonballs were, gunning and gunning. 2 soldiers took Morisot by the head and the feet. 2 others did the same with Sauvage. The bodies swung lustily by strong hands, were cast to a distance, and, describing a curve, fell feet foremost into the stream. Stream is water. The water splashed high, came up high, foamed. The white color foam came, eddied. Eddied means some circles were made in the water, then grew calm. Tiny waves lapped the shore. Little bit of waves came. A few streaks of blood moved the surface of the river. The officer, calm throughout, remarked with grim humor. Serious humor. Grim means serious humor. "It's the fish's turn now," which means he wants the fishes to eat them. Then he retraced his way to the house. Suddenly he caught sight of the net full of gudgeons lying forgotten in the grass. He picked it up, examined it, smiled and called, "Wilhelm!" A white aproned soldier responded to the summons, the call. Summons means the call. And the Prussian, tossing him the catch of the 2 murdered men, said, "Have these fishes fried for me at once while they are still alive. They will make a tasty dish." Then he resumed his pipe. This is such an extraordinary story. And that is why great stories like this cannot be explained. It is a life shown, a slice of life shown to all of us. Thank you everybody for listening to this. We will come again with another wonderful, extraordinary story by these great authors. Guy de Maupassant is definitely one of them. Thank you.